Hey, what's up, guys? I'm going to be doing another chapter reading from the Gerald Shea memo. So let's get right to it. This is going to be part 5, the future hijackers and FBI suspects, or chapter 5. So let me blow it up a little bit so everyone can read. It is clear that Hollywood was the core of operations for the future hijackers and their collaborators. All of the hijackers of 3 of the 4 aircraft that were commandeered on September 11th lived in Hollywood or its immediate environments in the months leading up to the hijackings. These included all of the hijackers of American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston, which crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower, who lived in Hollywood itself. They were Mohammed Atta, Abdulaziz Al Amari, Walid El Sheri, Wael El Sheri, and Satam El Saskami. 2 of the 4 hijackers of United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark, which crashed in Pennsylvania, Ziad Jarrah and Ahmed El Nami, also lived in Hollywood. 2 of the 5 hijackers of United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston, which crashed into the World Trade Center South Tower, Marwan Al Shehi and Mohand Al Shadi, lived in Hollywood as well. 2 remaining hijackers on those planes, Fayez Bani Hamad and Hamza Al Ghamdi on the South Tower plane, and Saeed Al Ghamdi and Ahmed Al Haznawi in the Pennsylvania plane, lived in Delray Beach. Khalid Al Midar and Nawaf Al Hazmi, overall leaders of the hijackers and hijackers of the Pentagon plane, had addresses in both Bergen County, New Jersey, and in Hollywood and Delray Beach, respectively. Well, that's interesting. I totally forgot that they were in Delray Beach and in Hollywood. And this goes to show you just how intimately close the Israeli DEA groups were to the 9/11 hijackers. It's even worse than I originally had thought. Many of the above future hijackers had Hollywood addresses interspersed with or within hundreds of yards of the members of the Israeli DEA groups. The commission has in its possession 2 hijackers' timelines, which appear to trace the future hijackers' moments in the periods leading up to September 11th. They were compiled by the FBI and are dated November 14th and December 5th, 2003. The FBI has confirmed that it prepared, edited, and declassified the hijackers' timelines for the commission, and that any decision to release them would be the commission's alone. Thus far, however, the commission has declined to release them. Now, it's no shock, because the commission basically covered up for the NSA and basically covered up the Saudi intelligence ring as well. So if Israel's going to be involved, of course, they're going to be covered. There are, nevertheless, a number of hijacker timelines prepared by individuals or groups that are generally available. One of those timelines, entitled the Annotated Timeline of the 9/11 Hijackers for Researchers, and interesting, I'll have to see what comes up from this, because I never even heard of it. Unless it's from the Office of the Inspector General. But I digress. Well, one of those timelines, entitled the Annotated Timeline of 9/11 Hijackers for Researchers, dated May 13, 2002, represents that it has been compiled from public sources and is used as a reference here. It is available at freepublic.com. I don't know if that site even works anymore. Though dated in a number of respects, it was issued a year and a half before the FBI's hijackers timelines and appears generally consistent with publicly available U.S. government reports on the hijackers' movements, including information from the FBI's hijackers timelines to the extent discernible from citations in the commission's footnotes, the commission staff statements, the Joint Committee report, and other governmental reports and accounts in the established press. I'll have to look for that later. And if I find it, I'll of course, share it in the description. As to the timing of the operations of the Israelis in Florida, the Israeli DEA group led by Hanan Sarfati, and that's a name everybody should remember because he was one of the leaders of the Hollywood DEA groups, was stopped in Tampa on March 1st, 2001, as noted above, and at that time provided their Hollywood area addresses to DEA agents. Sarfati said that he had arrived in the United States approximately 1 year earlier, but, as noted above, refused to state what he had been doing since that time or for the 2 years prior since he had left the Army. Interesting. Now, of course, if he's undertaking a covert operation, he's definitely not telling U.S. intelligence or law enforcement. He's going to keep that quiet because if he, of course, shares that, the jig is up. So, I mean, just how invested was Hanan Sarfati and his group. Another group based in the Hollywood area, led by Pierre Segalovitz, was stopped on May 3rd, 2001. I've heard of him before, and provided their addresses. Segalovitz had arrived in the United States on January 17, 2001. You'll see that these Israeli DEA groups have been here for quite some time. This is 9 months before the 9/11 attacks, almost 9 months to the date. So these guys had time to basically get inside the United States and basically start monitoring operations. The question is, by what manner did they know about the hijackers and where they were inside the United States? Unless they had a mole in the Hamburg cell, as I once theorized through 100% speculation at Ziad Jarrah, or they were told by the domestic intelligence agencies like the CIA. But the CIA never mentions these guys. So, unless they were conducting operations on Al-Qaeda abroad and many years prior to 9/11, any of these scenarios could be given legitimacy. As to the hijackers, a number of them lived in the Hollywood area or elsewhere in Florida well before 2000, 2001. Hani Hanjour, the pilot of the Pentagon plane and a member of the New Jersey hijacker group, had lived in the Hollywood area for a time in 1996 in Miramar, a few miles southwest of Florida. He also went to the University of Arizona in 1992 and studied electrical engineering. So he's been here the longest out of anybody. He's also partly mentioned in the Phoenix memo, through an informant to the agent who wrote the memo, Ken Williams. And his name was Henry Ellen Abu Yaqub, I think it was, Ibrahim. He was a Muslim convert. Saeed Al-Ghamdi had lived in Daytona Beach for several years in the 1990s. And Walid al-Shari had taken flight lessons there in 1997. Now, I see there's a mistake. So, these aren't the future hijackers. I mentioned this before in Jason Berman's video. Saeed Al-Ghamdi, that participated in 9/11, was 22. So if this was in the mid-1990s, he's well under the age of 17. So I looked up Saeed Al-Ghamdi, and there is indeed a Saeed Al-Ghamdi that lived in Daytona Beach, but he was much older than the hijacker Saeed Al-Ghamdi. Walid al-Shari had taken flight lessons in 1997, but that's impossible because Walid al-Shari was in Saudi Arabia in 1997. Mohammed Atta had lived in Daytona Beach in the mid-1990s. And again, these are common Arabic names. And Mohammed Atta would not have been here in Daytona Beach in the 1990s because he's actually studying in the University of Berlin, was it? Shoot, I forgot the name of that college. Dieter Muschel was his teacher. He actually wrote his thesis on Syria. So he was in Germany studying. In mid-2000, the leaders of the Florida hijackers arrived in Florida to prepare for the hijackings and were followed in 2001 by their subordinates. Thus, Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shea, and Ziad Jarrah arrived between May and June of 2000. All of them attended flight schools in Venice, Florida, not far from Fort Myers, where the Hollywood Israeli DA groups were later found operating. Although the Israeli DA groups were questioned in Fort Myers by DA agents a few months after the hijackers had left for Hollywood, the reactive nature of the DA report makes it difficult to track the timing of the Israeli group's movements, except when they were spying on the DA, or to the extent they disclosed their movements, as they sometimes did, to DA or INS agents or other law enforcement authorities. So these guys were really hush-hush. And there's a large number of them, anywhere between, I think it was 200 to 250, I think, if you count the moving companies as well. It was a huge foreign intelligence. And they all kept to themselves. Didn't leave a paper trail. Smart buggers, aren't they? Mohammed Atta and Muhammad caught myself tripping there. Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shea were in the Hollywood area by the end of December of 2000, when they took flight training courses at Opa-locka, about 15 miles southwest of of Hollywood. Ziad Jarrah took flight training courses the following month in January 2001 in Virginia Gardens, about 20 miles south of Hollywood. So that even when they were at flight schools, they were not far. The Israeli DA groups lived not that far from the flight schools either. I mean, this is all too convenient, isn't it? Saudis out west with the CIA, the Israelis out east and southwest, living near the hijackers of 9/11 and their associates. I can only imagine the amount of intelligence that these Israeli DA groups collected. Signals, human intelligence, my goodness. Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shea settled permanently on the east coast of Florida, somewhere in the Hollywood area, in mid to late of February 2001. They procured a mailbox address on Sheridan Street in Hollywood sometime earlier in the year. Ziad Jarrah returned to Hollywood from abroad in April. Ziad Jarrah would actually is the only hijacker out of the group that lived alone and that also traveled very frequently in and out of the country, going back to Lebanon, going to Germany. And you never know who he's meeting. You never know who he's calling. This is the reason why he stood alone. The prowess subordinates arrived in the area at various dates between March and June. Oklahoma City and Norman, about 15 miles south of Oklahoma City, were also an important locus of activity for the future hijackers. Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shea had toured the Airman Flight School in Norman at the end of June 2000. Zacharias Moussaoui, a suspected potential hijacker, moved to Norman in February 2001 to take flight lessons at Airman. In May, Moussaoui had considered joining the future hijackers in Hollywood and inquired about flying lessons at the Pan Am International Flight School in Miami. In August of 2001, however, he left for the Pan Am Flight School in Minnesota, where he raised suspicions and was arrested. Moussaoui basically asked his instructors on how to fly the plane, but he didn't care about landing. He didn't ask about anything else. He basically, he did say, how do you turn off the oxygen? And he really drew attention to himself. And so the FBI under Harry Samad had arrested him, and an associate of his named Hussein al-Attas. And what they found on Hussein al-Attas was a martyrdom will. Really? 5 other individuals on the May 2002 FBI suspect lived in Norman, including at least 2 roommates of Moussaoui, Hussein al-Attas and Mukram Ali. Nawaf al-Hazmi had also been in Oklahoma. He was, as the commission and the committees knew, an important leader of the hijackers and an attendee at meetings in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. That was the Al-Qaeda summit meeting where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Ridwan Samuddin, Tawfiq bin Atash, and Fahad al-Kuso, and a number of others that were involved with the USS Cole bombing and the 9/11 attacks. on April 1st, and it was monitored by the CIA and Malaysian authorities. On April 1st, 2001, Nawaf al-Hazmi was stopped for speeding on Interstate 40 in western Oklahoma, apparently headed for Oklahoma City and Musawi in Norman. The Israeli DA groups were also active in Oklahoma City during the spring of 2001, like clockwork. Of course they are. Wherever the hijackers are, they are. On March 28, 2001, the following day, a DA midnight raid near Dallas, described further below, an Israeli DA group on their way to Oklahoma City arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport from Frankfurt. In a scene reminiscent of the Keystone Cops and other clandestine DA and INS surveillance, they tried to avoid being detected as a group and followed. The three arriving Israelis were Yoni Engel, Yotam Dagi, and Or Elroy. Elroy was an associate of Michael Kalmanovic, who actually is another big name in the Israeli DA groups, and Engel was a former Israeli company commander. That's a lot different than the young kids of the dancing Israelis. These guys were former military, former special ops in the military, like signals intelligence, company commanders. The hell were these guys doing? The three Israelis were traveling with an American, Eli Rabinowitz. After clearing customs, they met with an unidentified woman on the curb and then temporarily split up. Rabinowitz stayed with the woman while Engel, Dagay, and Elroy walked down the sidewalk to the next terminal. A van with California plates and registered in the name of a used car auction house pulled up to the curb, and as Dagay ducked into the second terminal, Engel and Elroy got in and it quickly left. The van returned in a few minutes. Dagay emerged from the terminal and climbed in. The van sped away again, only to return a third time to pick up Rabinowitz before finally leaving the airport. Well, that's freaking strange and a half. You know, well, don't bring attention to yourself. It's not like all these guys were geniuses, right? I mean, goodness gracious. On April 4th, Engel, Dagay, and Elroy were next questioned in St. Louis, where the headquarters of Amdocs, the Israeli communications software company, are located. Now, Amdocs was a main focus of Carl Cameron's expose about Israeli intelligence and their connections inside the United States following the 9/11 hijackers. Amdocs was a focal point of that story. They had visited Oklahoma City at the same time between April 1st and April 4th when Nawaf al-Hazmi was there, presumably to meet with Musawi. And that's incredible that they were in that city at the same time when Nawaf al-Hazmi paid a temporary visit to Musawi. You talk about monitoring these guys around the clock. Man, they told INS agents that they had traveled to Dallas from New York City and not, as the DA and INS knew, on a flight from Frankfurt. On April 30th, 2001, an Air Force alert was issued from Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City concerning a possible intelligence collection effort being conducted by Israeli art students. On May 17th, 4 Israelis were reported in the Midwest City area between Oklahoma City and Norman. They stated they were there to promote Israeli art. I mean, think of it. You have former signals intelligence operators and former company commanders and active company commanders of the Israeli military selling art in the United States. Of course, the art's a sham. These guys were basically trying to find out where the FBI and DA lived and to collect as much intelligence on them using spyware to listen to their phone calls or what they were saying in the house. This is an elaborate operation, huge. They were charged with visa violations and were booked into the Oklahoma City jail at the instance of the INS. Bond was initially set at $25,000 each. All 4 requested voluntary departure from the United States. An unusually large number of Israeli DA group members were located in Irving, Texas, which is the second biggest hub of the Israeli DA groups. First was Hollywood, but Irving, Texas was next, an area that does not appear to have been frequented by future hijackers or by many FBI suspects. Texas, however, and in particular Dallas and Irving, appears to have been an important staging area and training ground for the Israeli DEA groups, given the presence there of key liaisons between senior recruiting personnel in Israel and the Israeli DEA groups in the United States. DEA and INS surveillance of Israeli DEA groups' arrivals at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, the considerable telecommunications sophistication and expertise of DEA groups' associates in Dallas, and large numbers of Israeli DEA groups personnel, many of whom were expelled from the United States after a midnight raid conducted by the DEA and the INS. Let me add a little bit to this. Their elaborate telecommunications operation system is basically true. And, you know, when you are dedicated just to signal surveillance, meaning wiretapping phones, putting listening devices in cars or in homes or in private areas where you can listen to conversations. And when you have this many people involved, you can only imagine the amount of data these guys collected just in 2001 alone. So how do we get to this information? Because, you know, Israel's not going to basically allow for those operators to come back to the United States and give sworn testimony about what they were doing, because the United States don't got a backbone and won't request it. This memorandum should be memorized by not just the 9/11 Truth Movement, who, unfortunately, a large percentage of them don't even know this exists. But they love to blame Israel anyway. As we have seen, Tomer Ben-Dor, another big name, stopped by the INS and DA at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in May of 2001, worked for an Israeli wiretapping company. Come on, folks. Okay? And had with him a computer program referring to DEA groups. He was traveling with Marina Glickman and Zeev Miller, both computer programmers for an Israeli software company. Are we finally getting it? These guys were running a large-scale surveillance operation of the 9/11 hijackers and their associates, and the FBI and the DEA, and God knows who else. Remember, they have a telecommunications company on their behalf, Amdocs. They were both vague and inconsistent about their travel plans. Michael Gall, who had an address in Edgewater, New Jersey, the base of the Israeli New Jersey group, and not far from the headquarters of Mr. Ben-Dor's company, had a relationship with Amdocs, another telecommunications company. Too many of these guys are connected to Amdocs. Michael Kalmanovic and Itay Simon, both of Dallas and Los Angeles, were the principal links between the Israeli operation in the United States and 5 Israeli DA groups recruiters in Israel. These are big names right here. The DA and INS conducted a midnight raid on the Israeli DA group's apartment complex in Irving on the night of March 26, 27, 2001, and expelled 13 of their members from the United States on March 31st, 2001. Their transportation out of the country was arranged by the Israeli embassy. What they should have done was grant a temporary stay in the United States and have the FBI or local law enforcement, but preferably the FBI, to conduct interrogations of these people to find out what they were doing here specifically and what they obtained, if they ever got as far as revealing this operation, and you know, ask these people to share whatever information they have. But this is the ingenious of the Israeli groups, because they were all here on temporary either work visas, student visas, or temp visas, visitors. But they never uh, renewed or filed an application to renew their visas. And this is really important because I said it before. Because if they all overstayed their visas, if they expired, let's just say, the INS takes over the case because the first crime committed is overstaying the visa. And if they're working and they don't have a work visa, if they're on a, say, for example, they have a student visa, well, they're not allowed to work because a work visa, I think it takes longer than a student visa. And basically, you have to pay taxes on the money for the, wherever company you're working for. That's why they have different visas. But these guys basically all overstayed their visas and they were all deported. That's the first punishment, right? You don't go to, you go before a court and basically, they file a release waiver, and either through the Israeli embassy or, the INS, they basically deport you back to your home country. I mean, it's really a great elaborate setup when you think of it. Here's over 200 people that mainly a large majority of them work in Israeli military, specifically Israeli intelligence, signals intelligence, or counterterrorism. And they were here collecting information, probably listening to phone calls, listening to conversations. And they basically knew about the operation before it even happened, and basically either manipulated the plot and to ensure that the 9/11 planes operation went off successfully. That's speculation on my part, but it's reasonable because at this point, with this many people, what else would they be doing? Now, according to the Israeli government, they were here collecting information about Hamas and Hezbollah. That may well be true, but as you could see through the Gerald Shea memo, they were also involved very intimately with the 9/11 hijackers. Just now, the most important question: how intimately were they involved with the 9/11 hijackers? Were they somehow in the plot, a small part of it? Were they somehow, did they collect information that could have revealed the plot if shared with local and federal authorities? We don't know, because they were all deported for violating their visas. And like I said before, Israel's not in a rush to deport them back to the United States so they could be properly interviewed by the FBI. And the United States is basically not going to request this because they got no backbone. Exhibit B lists the names of the members of the Israeli DA groups and of future hijackers and FBI suspects located in Hollywood, Florida, in Hudson and Bergen counties, New Jersey, in Oklahoma City, Norman, Oklahoma, in San Diego, in Los Angeles, and in Dallas, all during the period leading up to September 11th. The map of the United States attached as map 4 shows all of these locations and illustrations, as well as the presence of both groups during the period in Wichita, Kansas, Louisville, and Lexington, Kentucky. By the way, just to add a little bit to that before I go on, members of the Saudis kingdom, I'm talking about princes, and also the Bin Laden family were picked up by the FBI in Lexington, Kentucky, to basically fly out of the country on orders of the Bush White House. Atlanta, Georgia, Tampa, Venice, Fort Myers, Florida, and Arlington, Fredericksburg, Virginia. So there you have it. You had a large-scale Israeli signals intelligence communications operation where they were most likely collecting or obtaining voice records of the hijackers through talking through the cell phone, talking to a house phone, because you don't know if they bugged their houses in Hollywood, Florida, or that they bugged their rental cars. It could have been all these things, but we don't know for sure. But if they're working in Israeli signals intelligence, I mean, what else would they be doing, right? Just put two and two together. It's not irrational nor prejudicial to say this, right? And then you had company commanders for the Israeli army working probably as coordinating for these signals intelligence groups. So you have like a guy that's probably having like 3 to 4 people in this group. They bug the house, and then they listen from a distance, either in a van or a car, taking down reports, writing down what they're saying. We don't know for sure, but what else would they be doing, right? And until we start getting the right people to start asking the right questions and not with this ridiculous no hijackers, no planes, because if there's no hijackers, all of this goes away. All of this. And I hope a lot of people get it. All right. I'll end it right there. We got a little bit of information tonight, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good night, everybody, and a good weekend.